The terrorist organization Hamas is rebuilding its power in the Gaza Strip, exploiting the misery of the Gazan civilian population. And the winter has finally arrived to Israel over this weekend, and that meant heavy rain and winds in the Gaza Strip area, turning streets into rivers of mud and destroying many of the tents that people have taken shelter inside. Hamas is trying to say to the world that it is Israel's fault, and many are eagerly falling for this deception. And meanwhile, we're still wondering what will happen to the 200 terrorists still stuck in tunnels in Rafah. They're running out of food and out of water, and some of the tunnels are probably being flooded in this rainy weather that we're having. And now, the United States is considering a plan to exile them to Turkey. There are also many other disagreements over the next phase in Gaza, as Israel warns that the plan is heading towards a dead end. And the Americans are now pushing for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip to begin even before Hamas is disarmed, and Israel is opposing this plan. Elsewhere, Iran's main ally, Russia, is moving strongly against American assets in the Middle East, and that might have an effect on Israel regarding the Palestinian state issue. Speaking of which, White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff plans to meet with the senior Hamas official, El Chaya, ahead of a decision at the United Nations, and Israel is preparing for the entry of foreign military forces into Gaza. In the northern arena, Hezbollah has crossed another line, and Israel is preparing a disproportionate response. And further afield, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps had admitted to seizing an Emirati oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman as it was on its way to Singapore. Someone should tell the IRGC that people cannot drink oil, and water is becoming very hard to find in Iranian cities. Rationing has already started, and it still hasn't rained. And in related news, President Trump is preparing to host the leadership of Saudi Arabia. They want to buy F-35s as well as many other things, and Israel is closely watching the situation. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto. Together with me is Mati Shoshani, and we're bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. The desperate humanitarian situation in Gaza is being exploited by Hamas to request concessions from the international community. Images of Gazan children standing knee-deep in water and tents collapsing in the rain are flooding the social media networks, alongside reports of heavy rains and renewed claims that Israel is deliberately blocking the entry of aid, internationally adding to the misery caused by the harsh winter weather. And meanwhile, the terrorist organization Hamas continues to strengthen its control in Gaza and issue directives to its operatives. Speaking of Hamas operatives, the United States is considering the possibility that the 200 Hamas terrorists who remain on the Israeli side beneath the tunnels will be released and exiled to Turkey. This comes as Hamas sources admit that they do not know how many of them are even still alive, noting that many are without supplies of food and water. However, Hamas also insists that these operatives, however many are still alive, will not surrender themselves to Israel, while Israel has made it clear that they will not grant them amnesty. The United States is exerting pressure on Israel to compromise, and we'll have to see where this goes. On Monday, the United Nations Security Council is expected to discuss the American draft resolution to establish a stabilization force in Gaza as part of the Day After plan. The Day After in Gaza is becoming the central issue standing between Israel and the United States, as the Trump administration struggles to assemble the international force that would demilitarize the Gaza Strip and wishes to move on to the reconstruction track. However, senior Israeli officials are insisting that there will be no reconstruction before demilitarization, and that Hamas has significantly strengthened since the end of the war. And in a related story, according to a report in the New York Times, United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is preparing for another meeting with Hamas, and their negotiating team chief, Khalil El Chaya, in a step that is signaling the Trump administration's desire to maintain a direct communication channel despite criticism in Israel and in Washington. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the details. And in another arena, things are heating up as after a year, the combative ceasefire with Hezbollah appears on the path of a rapid collapse. Israel is considering a range of responses to Hezbollah's provocations, including a possible round of renewed hostilities. How did we get here and why? And why is the state of Lebanon expected in the coming days to submit an official complaint against the state of Israel over the construction of the separation wall on the Lebanon's border? And according to a report by the Reuters news agency, the complaint comes with the claim that the wall crossed the blue line. You get that? It's not a red line this time, it's the blue line. And we'll have the full story later in this report. And finally, after it was reported over the weekend that the oil tanker Talara veered off its course in the Gulf of Oman while en route to Singapore, the Revolutionary Guards announced that they had seized the tanker, adding that they acted on a court order, which is something that I've never heard before, but I guess there's a first time for everything. And in a related story, meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House this week, President Donald Trump confirmed that he's considering selling F-35s to Riyadh. The president also winked at Saudi Arabia in his Gaza plan with a path to a Palestinian state, but he expected it to join the Abraham Accords. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in the Middle East, in Israel, including the ongoing battle against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to say a huge thank you for your support. Israel's war against the fake news and anti-Semitic propaganda spread against Israel is a daily battle that we wage in order to reach as many people as possible and expose them to the truth about what is actually happening in Israel. So keep sharing the truth as widely as possible and become an ambassador of the truth. Most importantly, click the subscribe button so that you stay tuned to what's happening in Israel and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Deep beneath the ruins of Rafah, far below the surface, where a ceasefire has been in place for a month, one of the most delicate issues on the mediator's table continues to simmer. Dozens of Hamas terrorists, split into isolated cells and cut off from the headquarters of this organization, are stuck in a tunnel system beyond the line of Israeli control, and no solution has yet been found to this situation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear on several occasions that he does not intend to allow the terrorists to come out of the tunnels and return to Hamas-controlled areas. For its part, Hamas has announced that its men will not surrender and will not hand over their weapons, so it seems that we've come to an impasse. However, according to two Israeli officials who spoke with CNN, the American administration is pressuring to advance a solution, and the White House Special Envoy Jared Kushner raised this issue with Prime Minister Netanyahu in his meetings in Jerusalem at the beginning of last week. According to these Israeli officials, Washington wants to close what it calls the Rafah file in order to move on to the next stage of this agreement. Speaking of the second stage, international security mechanisms are supposed to be established and processes to demilitarize Hamas are to advance, after which further Israeli withdrawals further east of the Yellow Line are expected to take place. Each step in this plan requires negotiations with a series of countries, and the terrorists who remain underground are another piece of this puzzle. And with all of that in mind, according to the report, a possible move under consideration includes transferring the terrorists to a third country, with Turkey, which is mentioned as one of the options. However, this idea is just a proposal at this point. And in the meantime, the Prime Minister's office has issued details of any report about the possible release of the terrorists. But as time goes, the problem may resolve itself because with very little food and water, the terrorists are down to two options: surrender or fight. As experts in Gaza note that even Hamas itself does not know how many of them are still alive. The assessment is that some of the recent attacks against IDF forces, in which several soldiers fell, are attributed to isolated cells that apparently operated without contact with the Hamas command and led to heavy military responses that threatened the whole ceasefire from collapsing. Therefore, against the backdrop of the deadlock between Stage A and Stage B of this arrangement, neither side is moving. Hamas's military wing announced that its men will not surrender and will not hand themselves over to the enemy. And they also called on the mediators to find a solution that would preserve this pause. According to the American plan, amnesty could be considered for terrorists who relinquish their weapons, but it appears that the United States is pushing for a solution at any cost in order to prevent a critical failure of the existing arrangement with Hamas. But within a few hours on Wednesday, the IDF reported 2 incidents in which its forces acted to dismantle underground infrastructure and opened fire at 4 terrorists that are identified in the area under its control. The army emphasized that the actions are in line with the terms of this agreement, which allows strikes on infrastructure on the eastern side of the Yellow Line, despite condemnations around the world and in the international media. Another development over the weekend was the onset of winter weather. We're in the middle of November in Israel, and up until last Thursday, we've seen hardly no rain. But we're getting plenty of rain right now. And in Gaza, the rains are being accompanied by strong winds, which are having a devastating effect on the tent cities where hundreds of thousands of people are trying to take shelter. At the same time, Hamas is exploiting the harsh images which are not new to residents of the Gaza Strip, including wet tents, children standing knee-deep in water, and a lack of shelter to promote a new international campaign that is aimed at increasing pressure against Israel. The official statements released in recent hours by Hamas, the Government Information Office, and the Civil Defense in the Gaza Strip create a unified picture. Gaza is collapsing under the severe storm, while Israel is blocking humanitarian aid to the residents, and the international community is required to intervene immediately. The orchestrated campaign was titled "Gaza is Sinking," and I'm sorry to say, it's having quite an effect. The defense establishment notes that Hamas is exploiting the residents' real distress to achieve 2 main goals: international pressure on Israel to increase the entry of aid and forego military oversight, and improving Hamas's civilian standing in the eyes of the residents after months of war and massive destruction. Hamas is saying that these people are shivering in the rain and the cold because Israel has destroyed the buildings that they should be able to take shelter in. I say that those buildings had to be destroyed because Hamas was hiding weapons and ammunition, tunnel entrances, and rocket launching systems inside of them. I saw this with my own eyes when I was in the Gaza Strip, and I say that Hamas is responsible for these scenes of suffering that they're trying to blame on Israel. And just to add to that, we had a ceasefire. It happened before October 7th. Hamas violated that when they attacked the Jewish people of Israel. I'm curious to hear what you have to think about all of this. Let me know in the comments, guys. For its part, Israel is saying that it allows the entry of aid in accordance with agreements, and that any delays, if they exist at all, stem from security inspections intended to prevent Hamas from exploiting the aid for its military needs. Israeli sources also told the Saudi news portal El Arabiya on Saturday that the IDF is preparing an emergency plan in Gaza in case the ceasefire collapses. The sources noted that the move to Stage B of the Trump's plan to end this war is still stuck. According to the sources, there are disagreements that are concerning the establishment of the international force that is supposed to temporarily control the Gaza Strip, in addition to the issue of Hamas's disarmament that is still on the table and has not yet been decided. Therefore, the United Nations Security Council will hold a special discussion on Monday to approve the American proposal to bring a foreign military force into the Gaza Strip as part of an effort to disarm Hamas. Although a mandate has not yet been set for that force, Israel has in recent days begun initial preparations to receive thousands of foreign soldiers in our country. Israel wants the mandate to be given to the Arab Foreign Force by the United Nations Security Council to be significant, one that can act with force against the Hamas terrorist organization in order to disarm Hamas and demilitarize the Gaza Strip. At present, only Indonesia has declared that it will send soldiers to Gaza, but the numbers that they're talking about are significant. At present, only Indonesia had decided that they will send soldiers to the Gaza Strip, but the numbers that they're talking about are significant. In fact, they say that they're ready to send 20,000 soldiers, which is a lot. It might not be enough to do the job, but it's a very good start. However, the United Nations Security Council can grant two types of authorities to whatever forces go into Gaza. The first is a classic peacekeeping force, a force established with the consent of all parties and very limited in its powers. This is a force with a neutral presence only at the level of observation, monitoring, reporting, and mediation. This force has no authority to enforce decisions by the forces and also to use weapons only for self-defensive purposes. So, Israel has had a very bad experience with the United Nations peacekeeping force in the past, as they have failed to do anything useful in the north and also in the area with Syria and Lebanon. So, on the contrary, these forces have just gotten in the way, and in Lebanon, they're passively contributed to forces which were hostile to Israel. So, the second type of mandate that the Security Council can establish is a peace enforcement force. Such a force does not require the consent of all parties. It may impose order and security through military measures, but in addition, the force may be used to protect civilians, disarm armed groups, and carry out proactive operations to prevent any kind of escalation. Whatever kind of force eventually gets sent in, it will face a situation which is getting more complicated every single day. Hamas is rapidly reorganizing and tightening its governmental grip in the areas west of the Yellow Line. For instance, the Hamas police mechanism in the Bet Lahia area announced over the weekend that it resolved several cases of burglaries in homes and property in recent weeks, with a total value of stolen goods estimated at about $100,000. It was also stated that as part of the investigation, a suspect was arrested after fleeing to the center of the Gaza Strip, and the stolen items, including furniture and personal belongings, were found in his possession. The statement did not say whether the property was returned to the residents. However, on the basis of such incidents, Hamas presents itself as a restoring law and order inside Gaza and never mentions the destruction that it brought amongst the Gaza Strip in this war with Israel following the October 7th massacre. On that note, it's important to point out that since the beginning of the ceasefire, the Qatari Reconstruction Committee has increased the transfer of supplies to Gaza. Recently, Israel has actually allowed Doha to deliver a shipment of about 88,000 tents ahead of the winter. Moreover, the committee boasts of distribution of hundreds of thousands of food packages, delivering medical equipment, and distributing drinking water inside Gaza City. At the same time, Qatari bulldozers and trucks are clearing rubble and paving roads. Everything is carried out in coordination with Hamas and with its civil arms in the Gaza Strip, indirectly strengthening Hamas's rule in Gaza. As if that was not enough, UNRWA continues to teach the students of the Gaza Strip Despite the agency's links to terrorist organization and its inciting influence, a suitable alternative has not yet been found for 2 years. Felipe Lazarani, UNRWA's Secretary General, said on Saturday in a media briefing that in Gaza we still have 12,000 staff members focusing on public health and education. Since the ceasefire, they have increased their activity in the Gaza Strip. So we should not forget where all of this led us the last time that UNRWA was there. If you have any thoughts to share about UNRWA or anything else that we've talked about so far, I invite you to write that in the comments section and discuss this with the rest of the viewers. So here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report the whole truth. So make sure to share this content with as many people as possible. Ask us in the comments what would you like us to talk about that's happening in Israel, and make sure to subscribe so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, I want to tell you about one of our partners. If you watched our show before, you probably already know about the miracle of Arza. So I'm really excited to share this with all of you that Arza has launched their brand new Christmas box, which is called Nativity Night, and is their most incredible box yet. Each year, their Christmas box sells out faster and faster, and this year, because of huge demand, they're already almost gone. Every single item inside your Arza box is handmade by local Israeli artisans and small family businesses, so with your purchase, you're directly blessing and supporting the people of Israel while bringing the land of the Bible, where Jesus was born, right into your home. Inside there is a gorgeous hand-painted ceramic plate depicting the night of the Nativity, including delicious foods and spices, a beautiful handcrafted olive wood nativity ornament from Bethlehem, and so many other handcrafted treasures that bring the story of Christmas to your life. Every item is designed to help you experience the true meaning of Christmas right from the Holy Land. So they're only selling this box for a few more days, and it's almost sold out. Plus, they're just increasing our discount, and you will get 15% off of your subscription with the code TBNIL15. So, if you love Israel, or you know someone who does, this is the perfect gift to celebrate Christmas and share the beauty of the Holy Land with your loved ones. So go to arzabox.com/TBNIL and get yours today. Again, that's arzabox.com/TBNIL, and don't forget to use the coupon code TBNIL15 for 15% off of your Christmas box. And now, we are keeping our focus on the Gaza Strip, but switching slightly to diplomatic developments. Talks between Israel and the United States have been ongoing throughout the past weeks, and parties involved in these talks say that we are approaching a dead end. The reason is that the Americans are struggling to assemble the international force that is supposed to be responsible for the demilitarization of Gaza. The Trump administration wants to skip this stage and move straight to the issue of reconstructing the Gaza Strip, but a security official said that this order of things is unacceptable to Israel. Saying no reconstruction before demilitarization is what Israel wants. This runs counter to the Trump plan, and Gaza must be demilitarized. So the security official added, the Americans are failing to form a foreign force, so they are opting for interim solutions, which for now are unacceptable to Israel. And in the background of the substantive disagreements between Israel and the United States, which in practice delay the progress of the next stages of the Trump plan, and this is according to information that reached the defensive establishment in the past week, Hamas has begun setting up checkpoints inside the Gaza Strip and also collecting taxes from truck drivers. This detail indicates an economic strengthening in the terrorist organization, and also a strengthening of governments, proving who the landlord is in Gaza. And this brings us to the ladder of diplomatic priorities, as the United States is charging ahead with its intention to implement its day-after plan in the Gaza Strip. And now it seems that Israel is also aligning with President Donald Trump. The United Nations Security Council is expected to discuss this week the American proposal to establish the International Stabilization Force in Gaza, ISF, while Washington faces diplomatic difficulties in passing it, and also claims that the Palestinians are trying to sabotage the passage of the resolution, even though it includes a path to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Israel is going with the Americans, but also they hope that the Palestinians will torpedo it, missing an opportunity as they have done so often in the past. The official also referred to yesterday's report in the New York Times, which said that Steve Witkoff, the White House special envoy to the Middle East, will meet with Khalil al-Haya, the Hamas leader in Gaza, this week. The official added that the claim that Hamas remains a key player and is going nowhere are not true. Hamas's fate is known and fixed in the framework as stated. Hamas, as an organization, will not be part of the Gaza leadership on the day after. On the other hand, there are those in Jerusalem who see the American move at the United Nations as proof that Israel has become a United States protectorate and that it is entering the core of the Palestinian state, that is, a one-way path with no way back. On Saturday, the United States published a statement expressing full support for its draft, co-signed by 8 additional Arab and Muslim countries, including Qatar, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Jordan, and Turkey. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the American headquarters in Kiryat Gat is reviving its engines as the transition to the second stage approaches, and the methodology by which the Americans manage matters together with the IDF is that they establish 5 working teams and several additional integrative teams that are operating by topic: security, humanitarian, intelligence, infrastructure, and the establishment of a stabilization force. A Security Council decision will in practice kick off several of the next stages of this plan, including finalizing the ISF's authorities, its chains of command, and more. The IDF is also preparing for the next stages that will include training the stabilization force, planning where it will be stationed, and how will it organize on the ground. After training, the forces will be deployed in the field according to priorities. There is a concrete plan that begins with deploying the forces in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Rafah, and from there will be additional areas over time. This is a long process that will not take days or even weeks. The technical process of preparing the area, clearing the rubble and unexploded ordnance, and organizing the space to alter, bringing the population and the international forces is also a long and also complex process. The assessment is that the first forces will arrive only in a few weeks, and then the training will begin, while legal issues still remain regarding the definition of the forces' authorities and rules of engagement. IDF control in the area up to the yellow line, which is an entire zone, will continue until the stage at which all operational conditions are completed to ensure that Hamas does not take it over once more. The goal is that Israel will hold the area until it can know that it has succeeded in destroying all the infrastructure and create a situation in which Hamas does not take control of areas that were cleared of its forces. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development. So keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, do not forget to hit that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to what's happening in Israel, boots on the ground style. Now, we'll turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will give us a look at Russia's moves against the United States and its assets in the region, and the possibility that Iran is pushing Moscow to take more aggressive actions that also in other parts of the world, not just in the Middle East. These developments may lead to heavy pressure on Israel regarding the issue of a Palestinian state. So Mati, what happens if the balance of power in the Middle East really allows the jihadists to win? In addition, President Trump is preparing for a fateful meeting with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, and Israel is watching very closely. So, what's coming up next?
Why is Russia suddenly so interested in what's happening in the Gaza Strip? Why are they running to the UN Security Council with their own proposal of the day after for the Gaza Strip that doesn't include Hamas? How does this tie to the Iranians, and what does this mean for Israel? Give me a couple minutes and I'm going to break down everything that is happening in this part of the world over the next few minutes. Now we'll start with the big headlines here. The Russian government, led by, of course, President Putin, well, they're not happy with the fact that the US has been leading the thrust for a normalization and a day after agreement in the Gaza Strip. So unhappy, in fact, that what they're doing now is presenting the UN Security Council, which is sort of the governing body, the most powerful entity when it comes especially to international diplomacy and politics in the UN, why they're presenting them with a day after plan that is different than the American plan. And they're saying, in many, many words, guys, we want to be part of what's happening. We want to be involved, we want to be engaged, we want to have a say, and specifically, we want to weaken and slow down the US plan as it plays out in the Gaza Strip. So let's break down what their plan is and why it's important to understand everything that is happening. So as we enter into this new week, Russia is trying to set the headlines for the week that's ahead of us. And the way they're doing this is they've gone in front of the UN and they've said, we don't click with this plan that the US has presented the world. We're not happy with what they're trying to do in the Gaza Strip, and we want our own plan. What's different about their plan? Well, the difference about their plan is that it's different than the US plan. It's not the same one. They want to be a counterforce to what the US has been doing. And let me remind everyone, essentially, the US, led by President Donald Trump, has been able to circumnavigate the fact that the UN is a highly inefficient organization in restructuring and stopping war, violence, especially in the Middle East. One might say, and many do say, including myself, that they possibly don't want to stop the violence in the Middle East. But in any case, the United States has been working directly with multiple countries to try and restructure, strengthen, and bring peace and stability to this part of the world. And the Russians have now gone to the UN and said, guys, we don't like the US plan that of course has been communicated to the UN. We want to present our own plan. We want you to negotiate this plan. We want you to debate this plan. And this plan is slower. This plan is less effective. This plan is less clear in the way that it operates. Now, why is this important? Well, the idea here is very, very simple. The next phase for the Gaza Strip is a phase in which the US doesn't work alone, and Israel isn't the one fighting against Hamas on its own. Phase 2 is the big unity phase. Phase 2 is when all the countries come together and try to rebuild the Gaza Strip, first with civil governance, humanitarian aid, and ultimately also military control. But to get to that step, what the US has to do, what Israel has to do, what the other countries that are involved have to do is they need to pull in an international coalition. And this is where Russia wants to get involved. They want the world to realize that they can't move forward without them unless Russia's part of the game. Now, why are they doing this? What is the agenda that the Russian government carries in this whole story? Well, it's simple. They want to counter US influence and US power in this part of the world. That's been their agenda in the past, and that is, once again, their agenda in this story. They've seen the US on the rise in power and influence. It started, of course, in the strike on Iran back in June, where the United States joined forces with Israel in striking the Iranian nuclear facilities. And it continued definitely in earnest in recent months with the visit of President Trump, the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, the exchange of hostages, and of course working on phase 2, which is a very dramatic phase, which is building an international coalition. And guys, this coalition is already in motion. There is a base in southern Israel that has thousands, and soon probably much more than that, international observers, humanitarian workers, government officials, and military generals from multiple armies, not just the Americans. The same is probably going to happen if President Trump gets what he spoke about just this last weekend. The same will happen also in Syria with a new American base. Russia looks at all of this in concern. They always want to be the power. They always want to be the empire of whatever region they can take over and influence. And they definitely don't like the fact that the Americans have been rising up rapidly in power, influence, and clout in the Middle East. And this move is something to slow them down. So, unsurprisingly, Russia's doing all of this to strengthen its position in the Middle East. But the big winner from this move are, of course, the Iranians. What the Russians are doing is trying to push a weaker resolution, a slower progress when it comes to the Gaza Strip. And what that does, it gives the Iranians time to rebuild their power, time to rearm and refinance their proxies, and possibly once again gain power in the Middle East. Power that Israel and the United States fought very hard at a very expensive cost, mainly financially, back in June, to remove from the hands of the Iranian government. Now, where does this story get complex? Let me tell you the other side of the story. The other side is Saudi Arabia, and specifically F-35 planes in Saudi Arabia. What is the F-35? Well, that is a stealth, multifunctional fighter jet. One of the best fighter jets in the entire world, one that in this region, up till now, only Israel has. And the next part of our story is the Saudi Arabia government, together with the United States, talking about the US supplying the Saudis with F-35 jet fighters. And why is this important? And how is it connected to what's happening in Iran or what's happening in the Gaza Strip with Russia? Well, a big piece of what Trump has been doing in the Middle East, going back to the beginning of his first term, is the Abraham Accords, building a coalition in the region, strengthening ties, and bringing into the fold Muslim Arab countries to be part of a trade and defense pact between the United States, those countries, and Israel. And so far, it's worked beautifully. But the next big piece in this agreement is not Israel, it is the Saudi Arabian people and government. President Trump is planned to meet MBS soon. I think it's on Tuesday, 2 days from now, in the White House. And the discussion on the table is going to be whether or not the United States can bring the Saudis into a regional agreement. Maybe they can pull them into the next phase of the Abraham Accords, and the Saudis' desire for their position on a military level, a financial level, a power ranking level in the Middle East to be higher than it previously was. So what we're going to have to see here is the United States trying to give F-35 fighters to the Saudis to have the Saudis join in their coalition with Israel against the Iranians. Is that a lot to take in? It is. But let me try and simplify this idea. The idea is this. If Israel wants stability in this region, the way the Americans know how to deliver that is by bringing an international coalition. And the Russians want to weaken that coalition. And the way the Americans are trying to outmaneuver the Russians is by strengthening the Saudis, bringing them onto their side, and making sure that they're willing to do that by giving them F-35 fighter jets. There's another big piece in this whole story that I haven't really addressed yet, and that really isn't publicly talked about, and that's the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people outside of the Gaza Strip. Let me try and explain that. The Saudis have never been willing to normalize the relationship with Israel without a solution to the Palestinian problem, as it's called, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Another thing is that the American proposal for phase 2 of stabilizing the Gaza Strip and this region includes a series of reforms in the Palestinian Authority. And the Russian push in the UN to change the lettering or the wording of the agreement or the agreement to reshuffle, rebuild power in this region includes a softening of the reforms that will take place in the Palestinian Authority, which might be seen as an attempt by the Russian government to empower the Palestinian Authority, but in reality what it is actually trying to slow down and buy time for the Palestinian Authority or for the Gaza Hamas-led coalition, and of course behind them the Iranians, to really draw out this negotiation, this shift of power, and change this region in a way that will be more favorable for Russian interest and less favorable for American interest. That's really what's happening here. And behind this, there's another piece of the puzzle, which is the US being willing to soften the wording when it comes to the reforms in the Palestinian Authority is a head nod in the direction of Saudis, we're going to give you F-35s. Maybe you can see this as a reconciliation of your insistence on having a solution or full and final solution to the Palestinian-Israeli relationship before you move into this coalition. This might be sort of the attempt by the US government to work with the Russians to work with the UN and with the Saudis by really allowing a more drawn out series of reforms in the Palestinian Authority. Again, this is a lot to take in, but I'm just trying to bring all these pieces together. There's one last piece here, Israel. Israel doesn't like the idea of F-35 jets ending up in the hands of the Saudis, but Israel doesn't have much of a choice here. Right now, we're looking at a Middle East where we need an international coalition. We need to make sure that Russia doesn't get involved. We need to make sure that the Iranians remain weak and weakened also in the future. And we need to make sure that the Saudis become part of the future of the American interest and axis of alliances in the Middle East. And to do that, we might have to accept the fact that the Saudis get the F-35 fighter jet. While all of this is happening, the Iranians have not been sitting and twiddling their thumbs. They have been once again testing the waters, literally and figuratively speaking, in the oceans. They're trying to see if they can once again disrupt maritime trade, and they've been once again probing ships in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea to see if they can get an effect on them. And what they're doing, let's listen to what they're saying here, what they're doing here is signaling to the world, guys, we're not done, and we will be happy to go back to disrupting and bothering global trade, to once again showing how powerful we are in this region, so you don't forget that you can't move forward in the Middle East without taking us into account. And what we're really witnessing here across the board is a reshuffling of the power balance of the Middle East, in which the United States, together with Israel, are positioned as the winning elements, the winning parties, and to that alliance, they pull in other countries. They pull in the Saudis, hopefully, possibly with F-35 jets. They pull in the Palestinians after a series of reforms, the new Gaza Strip, whatever that looks like in the future. The Egyptians, of course, the Qataris, and several other countries, including the Turks. And this is where it gets interesting. What we're watching over this weekend, and as we go into this week where MBS is planning to meet with President Trump, is the resistance, is the pushback by the Russians, who are saying, we don't want the US to do this all on their own. We want a stake in this. We want to have power in this. And on the same time, or at the same time, pushback by the Iranians, who are sort of chest thumping and showing that they're still active. And the last big piece that needs to fall into place is the Saudis. Whether or not they will get the F-35 fighter, whether or not they will join in a regional alliance with possibly boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip to create and usher in the day after agreement for the Gaza Strip. The day that doesn't have Hamas and has an international coalition, and one day, in one way, possibly also a government led by the Palestinians. So what can we expect to see in the next days and weeks? One, I think we all need to be tuned into what's going to happen in the meeting between MBS and President Trump just in a couple days, because those headlines might really be F-35 fighters for the Saudis, and possibly the Saudis being part of the day after solution in the Gaza Strip, and possibly pushing back against the Iranians. And then we can probably see a public response and probably a debate between the Russians and the Americans that will ultimately end with the Americans giving something to the Russians, because again, you don't want to burn a relationship with a country like Russia, especially when America wants to be part of the solution that has to do with also Ukraine in the day after. But that's probably for other YouTube channels and other shows. But there's a lot going on in this Middle East. There's a lot that's going on in the power shift. And as I like to say, we're watching history unfold in front of our eyes. The next few days are going to be crucial, and make sure you keep up to date with everything that's happening.
Thank you very much, Matti. As usual, you brought us a lot of clarity to these very difficult issues. And now we'll move on to developments on our border with Lebanon. So 1 second before we continue, if you haven't yet clicked that subscribe button, please do it. It helps us a lot. Israeli and American pressure on Beirut has increased in recent weeks. This is after Lebanon was the one to initiate a renewed discussion on the possibility of resuming negotiations. Meanwhile, reports from Lebanon indicate that Hezbollah moved in the past week to a clear political escalation, beginning with an open letter that is published by the organization and continuing with statements of Hezbollah's Secretary General, Sheikh Naim Qassem. According to reports from Lebanon, the publication of Hezbollah's open letter coincided with a series of visits by foreign envoys who carried one central message. They want a push for direct negotiations between Beirut and Israel, along with implicit threat that Jerusalem might consider a broad military action if the dialogue does not advance. Reports in Lebanon note that in Jerusalem and in Washington, the current situation is seen as an opportunity to reshape the reality along this border, and hence, according to the sources, Israel's refusal to fully implement the ceasefire. Hezbollah, for its part, has so far refrained from a military response to every violation, while Beirut demands, first and foremost, a full return to the agreement's commitments. The question of the price that is supposed to accompany any such move remains open from the Lebanese point of view. However, according to publications in the Lebanese media, Lebanon has become over the past year a constant pressure area where several arms are being employed simultaneously, including airstrikes, targeted assassinations, economic and political measures, and stricter conditions for receiving aid to the army. In Israel, it is claimed that the policy of a creeping occupation in the south will continue, aiming to set facts on the ground without entering a wide campaign. In Washington, Lebanon's political figures note that the demand is growing for tangible implementation of the principles of blocking weapons outside the state, which in Beirut is seen as an attempt to promote a significant reduction of Hezbollah's power north of the Litani River. Political figures in Lebanon emphasize that Qassem's recent speech is perceived as the organization's drawing of a clear red line. Hezbollah clarifies that it is not retreating from its stance of operating behind the state, but refuses to accept the use of sovereignty and other slogans as a reason to open a track that would lead to its disarmament. And according to sources in the Lebanese capital, the organization is prepared to accept the expansion of the army's deployment as long as this step does not become a starting point for a process whose final aim is the disarmament of the military wing. In summary assessments in the Lebanese capital, it is argued that Qassem's speech is not a solution to the crisis, but it clearly delineates Hezbollah's boundaries. There is no intention to allow a situation in which the security of northern Israel and their communities is granted without significant political compensation, and no willingness to return the calm arrangement into an indirect path to disarmament. Lebanese sources warn that between those positions, a very limited space remains for an arrangement, and if no change occurs, it is possible that the warning that everything has a limit will shift from a political declaration to a real possibility of renewed confrontation in the south. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development, so keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, do not forget to hit the subscribe button to help us reach more people with what's happening in Israel, boots on the ground style. Now, we are switching our focus to Iran, where the Tasnim news agency reported on Saturday that Iran's Revolutionary Guards announced that they have hijacked the tanker Talara, which departed from the United Arab Emirates en route to Singapore and sailed through the Strait of Hormuz last week. Media outlets in Iran reported that the tanker, which was flying the Marshall Islands flag, was identified and seized following Iranian judicial order. It was further reported that, according to the Iranians, Talara carried 30,000 tons of chemicals and was transferred to Iran for investigation, which revealed that it violated regulations and carried an unauthorized shipment. Yesterday, the British maritime security company Amberi stated that while the tanker was sailing in the Gulf of Oman, 3 small boats attached themselves to it and it turned towards the Iranian territorial waters. The AP news agency reported that a United States Navy remotely piloted aircraft of the type MQ-4C Triton was circling the skies at the time that the Talara was being seized. So I have a couple of comments to make about all of this. First, if Iran has decided to start seizing oil tankers and holding them under the pretext of safety inspections, then the rest of the world should start doing the same thing to the Iranian oil tankers. I'm sure this will cause the Iranians to stop using this deceitful tactic very, very quickly. Second, Iran's biggest problem right now is that its cities are running out of drinking water, and they should be using their resources to find a solution for that problem, not seizing oil tankers on the high seas. Iran has almost 39 million residents, and they all need water, but none of them can drink oil. In this context, it's important to note that against the backdrop of the drought that is afflicting Iran, supermarkets in the capital city of Tehran have begun allowing customers to buy no more than 1 pack of 6 mineral water bottles per purchase. Tehran is in its 6th consecutive year of drought, and the reservoirs feeding the capital have dropped to the lowest level in decades, and according to reports, the situation is very bad in this country. Residents have begun buying bottled water due to the concerns about the quality of the tap water, shortages, and soaring prices in recent weeks. Iran's energy minister, Abbas Alibadi, was quoted on state television as saying that the move will prevent waste even if it causes more inconvenience, while local media reported that nighttime water cuts have already begun in the metropolis area of more than 10 million residents. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian warned in the speech earlier this month that residents in Tehran may be forced to leave the Iranian capital due to water shortages if no rain falls before the end of the year, adding that even with rationing, if it doesn't rain, we will be left without water and will have to evacuate Tehran. As I've said before in these reports, it is unclear where Tehran's nearly 10 million people can evacuate to, as there are water shortages in Iran's other large cities and rural areas as well. Mohsen Ardakani, the CEO of the provincial water company in Tehran, noted that the water level in the reservoirs supplying the capital has fallen to a decades-long low, and the Tasnim news agency reported that the country's precipitation levels this year reached only 152 millimeters, which is a 40% decrease from the 57-year average. Officials have urged residents to use as little water as possible, and many schools, businesses, and government offices have been operating at reduced capacity in order to stretch the limited resources. Electricity has also been in short supply in many areas, and this problem has been made worse by scorching heat waves. So I want to call on all of you to continue and spread the truth. Share, and share our content with as many people as possible. Hit the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another boots on the ground episode. And most importantly, guys, we need you to pray. This is a spiritual war, and how do you fight lies and deceit? By sharing the truth. How do you fight a spiritual war? By praying. So let's make it personal. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers. Let's pray for wisdom to our leaders. Let's pray for God to take control in this region. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.